Torg, and I'm here to ask you one question and one question only. Explosions?
Hello everybody, Maven here, and the Severance Enclosure Exotic Titan chest instantly rose from trash to treasure this season with the rework they gave to it. So now they increase the size and damage of the explosion it creates, but more importantly, it kills with the explosion can create additional explosions, so you can potentially chain reaction entire rooms. So it's pretty awesome, and today we're going to dive in and really try it out and see what it's capable of. So let's get to it. Don't forget to drop a like because it helps out a ton, and I hope you enjoy. Alright, so before we even start Severance Enclosure Breakdown, I can already tell you with confidence, in my experience playing with it over the past 24 hours, it is easily one of the top 3 Titan exotics in the game now. This thing is a beast. And I would show a demonstration of what it does, but you can already see from the background gameplay, it just goes kaboom. You punch an enemy, enemies blow up, more enemies blow up, you get it. So the first question we got is how much damage does it deal? So we're going to do a little bit of a test here. Got some ads grouped together. I'm going to punch a target, and ads directly next to the explosion take upwards of 30k damage. And as you can see here, it has a pretty huge radius, about 12 to 15 meters. Does have fall off though, dropping down to around 20k, so it's not too much drop off. It still does respectable damage. And fun fact, this explosion goes through walls that could potentially be used later on to cheese an encounter. So just to show how good that actually is, I did this super Giga Chad clip against Carl here, where I actually don't even attack him. I'm attempting to kill Carl simply just by punching ads around him, proccing that Severance Enclosure, getting those free seemingly waveframe GL shots against him for absolutely free. You can get more nice little shots here of the radius of this thing, just booping him around the place because this exotic has very good knockback power as well, just plops ads up in the air if they happen to survive the explosion. And we do manage to kill Carl without even attacking him, just by attacking ads around him. So you can see the collabability of this exotic is amazing. And this isn't the first time I did a clip of killing Carl without shooting him. I did the same thing in my Necrotic Grip Thorn video that I may revisit in the near future, by the way. And so the Severance Enclosure, in a way, is like Necrotic Grip for Titan. It's sort of the same thing. So then it was time to figure out what is the best subclass to pair with the Severance Enclosure. So what I did is I went to Breakneck and I tested pretty much every charged melee ability Titan has on every subclass just to see what would happen. And everything seemed pretty identical. Huge explosion, followed by a lot of nothingness, because the Severance Enclosure only works with charged melee abilities. So there are 2 things that we really need here for the Severance Enclosure, and that is spam ability and also survivability, because to have a good PvE build, you gotta be able to survive. So when it comes to spam ability, immediately after the mod nerfs, stasis was completely ruled out. Yeah, you got stasis shards, you can get back your Howl of the Storm fairly quickly, and it is pretty explosive with the Severance Enclosure, but it's hard to spam it back to back like you used to be able to. And then there was Strand. Now, before even starting to test the Severance Enclosure, I was fairly certain that Strand was going to be the best option because Grapple Melee counts as a charged melee, and Frenzied Blade, you have 3 charges. But after the mod nerfs and after the nerf to Banner of War in general, Strand just isn't the same as it used to be, and it's not nearly as spammable as I thought it would be. You use up your Grapple and your Frenzied Blades and you kind of just sit there with no charges for a while. So after some brief Strand testing, that was ruled out as well. So for spam ability, that left us with 3 options, and that is Void, Arc, and Solar. That's right, all 3 light subclasses have spammable melees that you can use pretty much back to back. So we're going to do an Arc Solar Void comparison in the Hydroponics Delta. Now, why the Hydroponics Delta, you might ask? Because this is a Sunshot body shot against a Legionary in the Root of Nightmares raid, and this is a Sunshot body shot against a Legionary in the Hydroponics Delta. Ads in Hydroponics Delta are 2 times tankier than ads in raids, so it's a great place to test out weapons for endgame content. So we're going to start off with Void, because I believe that Void is the worst of the 3. So what we're going to need to spam infinite powered melees is Offensive Bulwark, because when you have the Offensive Bulwark perk procced, it counts your normal uncharged punches as powered melee attacks, thus proccing the Severance Enclosure. But in order for this to work, in order for Offensive Bulwark to be active, you need to have an overshield. So that's why we have our Bastion barricades, and that's why at some points in this clip you may see me use Vex Caliber to obtain an overshield, just so I can reproc Offensive Bulwark. And this is part of the reason that I feel Void is the worst of the three, because you have to constantly figure out a way to get an overshield. It's not the hardest thing in the world, but sometimes, and especially in tougher content, you tend to lose that overshield fairly quickly. However, one thing I will give it is that when you do have the overshield, you hit pretty hard and it does feel pretty good. Also, you're pretty good in the survivability department as well, because you can have things like Devour, you can have Echo of Leeching, and you can have a lot of grenade spam because Devour gives you grenade energy, and they even increased that this season. Also, Offensive Bulwark says whenever you have an overshield, your grenade charges significantly faster. So you got the grenade spam on deck for Void. Plus you also have Warded Dawn to help your teammates, and you also got the weaken effects with Echo of Undermining and whatnot. But as far as Void goes for Severance Enclosure, I would only use it in easy content. I wouldn't use it in anything mildly tough. So now let's move on to Arc. Now, similar to Void, Arc has an aspect that can turn our uncharged melees to count as powered melees, and that is called Knockout. So to proc Knockout, all we have to do is critically wound a target, which is incredibly easy to do, and you can do it by any means, by meleeing, by your weapon. You can even kill a target, and that will proc Knockout. So when we have Knockout proc, it gives us bonus melee damage, and also melee kills will proc health regeneration. And it's pretty good regeneration. It's not like the kind of regeneration that stops after you take damage. It keeps on going through the damage, sort of like Restoration on Solar. So Arc is definitely fine in the survivability department, but sometimes it can be a little bit annoying when you first get into an engagement and you don't have Knockout proc, and you have to proc it on that first target that you're trying to punch to death, and then sometimes you don't proc it until you get to the next fight. So it's a little bit annoying sometimes. But one thing I will give it is that it's not as annoying as losing your Void overshield. So in my opinion, Arc is a little bit better than Void. It does the job and it does it well. And finally, let's move on to Solar. I knew Solar would be one of the best. At the start of this, I thought Strand would be better, but I was severely wrong. Solar is by far the strongest and the best option, hands down, for the Severance Enclosure build. And I don't think anybody can deny that. So Solar has not one, but two charged melee attacks. One of them is obviously the throwing hammer. It did see a nerf recently though, so when you pick it up off the floor, it doesn't regenerate itself immediately. It regenerates itself over the course of 1.4 seconds. But that is totally fine because we're not really going to be spamming that too much. We're only going to use it in like ranged situations, and also in situations where we know that we're for sure going to land it, because it really sucks to whiff the baby hammer because then you have to go and find it and pick it up. So most of the time we're going to be utilizing our other powered melee, which is an aspect called Roaring Flames. Yes, yet another aspect that turns our uncharged melees into powered melees. Now, reading the aspect, it doesn't look like it actually does that for us, but it does. It's hidden. I think it used to say it, but Bungie might have removed the text and I don't know why. So as you know, Roaring Flames increases your solar ability damage, stacks up to 3 times. You get stacks by getting solar ability kills. However, while Roaring Flames is active, it turns your uncharged punches into solar punches, and they count as powered melee attacks. And since they count as powered melee attacks, they also contribute and add stacks of Roaring Flames, and also proc things like Heavy Handed and Focusing Strike and Impact Induction. It's excellent. And the timer on Roaring Flames is very generous. It's very easy to use. It's very forgiving. So Solar by far wins in the spam ability department. It's essentially infinite spam. All you have to do is proc Roaring Flames to get it going. So you just got to start off an encounter with a throwing hammer kill, which is not the hardest thing in the world. But not only that, Solar also by far wins on the survivability department, because we're getting infinite restoration that we're extending forever via Ember of Empyrean. And we are easily obtaining this restoration via Soul Invictus, because our solar ability Final Blows create sunspots to give us all these different kinds of benefits, one of which being that we apply restoration to ourselves for 5 seconds when we enter a sunspot. 5 seconds is a very generous timer for Ember of Empyrean to extend it. So alas, here is the build I ended up on for the Severance Enclosure on Solar. So let's break it down, starting off with our weapon choices. I got a 1-2 punch shotgun here because of the throwing hammer nerf. You now gotta throw a hammer, you gotta wait 1.4 seconds. So what are you gonna do in that amount of time? You're gonna shoot a 1-2 punch shot and then throw it a melee, and then you can throw your hammer again. So optimally, you're gonna wanna pair that along with the tractor cannon. However, I've been having a lot of fun with the Dragon's Breath rocket launcher. I've been very, very impressed with this thing. It does a lot of damage. But you know, if you're gonna be sweaty, go with the tractor cannon. So here's a clip against Carl as an example of what it would look like. You would go tractor hammer and then shotgun punch hammer, shotgun punch hammer, shotgun punch hammer. That's kind of the loop. However, that's if you're trying to conserve your shotgun ammo. If you want to have optimal DPS, you would go shotgun punch, shotgun hammer, shotgun punch, shotgun hammer. So even though the Severance Enclosure build is not doing as much damage as like Synthoceps or Worm God Caress, we can still do a pretty solid amount of damage regardless. So just for good measure, we're going to compare against Charles to see just how much damage we're missing out on versus the Synthoceps. So we're going to start off with the Severance Enclosure, trying to do our optimal combo. But in the heat of the moment, I do kind of mess it up a little bit, but I try to do tractor hammer and then shotgun punch, shotgun hammer, shotgun punch, shotgun hammer. Try to do as much optimal DPS as I could. But eventually I do have to reload my shotgun. I kind of scuff it a bit. I got to throw a healing nade, but eventually I managed to pick up the kill in a reasonable amount of time. So now we're going to move on to the Synthoceps, and it was definitely a little bit smoother in terms of DPS, but not by much, honestly. The Synthoceps did see a little bit of a nerf recently. They went down from 200% melee damage bonus to 165%. So not the biggest nerf in the world. They're still pretty broken, but the damage was honestly not too far apart from each other. And when it comes to general gameplay, I would definitely sacrifice a tiny bit of DPS to be able to do a lot better ad clear. So now let's break down the rest of our subclass, shall we? So we got Ember of Torches to get Radiant whenever we throw our baby hammer, and we're extending that Radiant forever via Ember of Empyrean. We got Ember of Ashes to apply more scorched stacks to targets, which is great with the sunspots we create from Soul Invictus and also our uncharged punches from Roar of Flames. And then we have Ember of Searing to spam fire spreads to help us get our nade back. Sometimes I use Healing Grenade, but you don't really need it because you get your restoration via your sunspots. So I'm using the Fusion Grenade. But another great thing about Ember of Searing is that it helps us get back our baby hammer if we accidentally throw it off a cliff, because defeating scorched targets grants melee energy. So stat-wise, because it's PvE and also because you're a Titan, obviously run 100 resilience, and then after that I put 100 discipline and the rest into intellect. However, you do not really need investment into strength, recovery, or mobility. These are the only 3 stats that matter. And for the mod setup here, we're running the good old setup of stacks on stacks with double solar weapon surge along with a copy of time dilation. I often like to run this setup in a lot of my builds because I like to have that constant 17% damage buff for my weapons. And I forgot to mention, but just run whatever solar primary you like. I'm having fun with the brand new Parabellum SMG. Sometimes I use the Igneous Hammer. And obviously the Solar Surge is good for my Dragon's Breath rocket launcher. I recommend trying that thing out. It's so good. So moving on, we're gonna need to make orbs of power to proc our solar weapon surges. So I got Reaper so that my next kill after placing down a barricade is gonna make an orb. I got Solar Siphon so our solar weapon double kills make orbs, and obviously Heavy Handed so our powered melee final blows make orbs. And then we have various mods that take advantage of the fact that we're spamming our melee, like Impact Induction, Focusing Strike, Double Hands-On, give us more super energy, grenade energy, and barricade energy all when we hit with our melee. And to top it all off, we got Bomb Runner class item would give us some grenade energy when we use our barricade. And that is basically it for the build. So now on to the gameplay loop. Like I mentioned before, you're gonna want to start off every engagement by proccing Roaring Flames. So you gotta get either a grenade or a throwing hammer kill, or a super kill, your choice. But you gotta prep that Roaring Flame so you can get your uncharged melees to turn into powered melees, and that's how you really get it rolling. And that is basically it. At that point, you just run around punching stuff. If you see a fatter target, just use your 1-2 punch shotgun with your throwing hammers. If you're not running a healing grenade, you may need to retreat and just use your Dragon's Breath, and there you go. Now, closing thoughts, I sincerely believe that this is one of the best Solar Titan builds that I've ever used. I honestly am going to be maining Severance Enclosure whenever I play Solar Titan because it's been super useful. It's just so nice where I see a bunch of ads and it's like, oh, if I go punch one of those ads, then suddenly all of them are dead. It's so much fun. And also you saw it in the background gameplay during Hydroponics Delta, but if the enemies actually live the Severance Explosion, they get yeeted, they get launched up in the air, and they can't attack you. They get booped back super hard. The knockback on this exotic is ridiculous. So it's very, very good for survivability. And don't let anybody tell you this thing is bad for damage, because when you see a fat target and they're surrounded by smaller ads, you just punch one of the smaller ads, and suddenly you create a chain reaction of explosions that all damage that big target, and you just get large chunks of free damage out of nowhere. I have honestly been incredibly impressed with this thing, and like I said in the intro, in my opinion now it's one of the top 3 Titan exotics. I'm gonna have to do a future video where I compare all of the best Solar Titan exotics to figure out which one is truly the best. So stay tuned for that video in the future. But for now, that's going to do it for this one. So as always, I'll leave a dim loadout link to this build down below in the description, and also the pinned comment if you would like to give it a try. And if you have any buddies who happen to be Titan mains, I'd appreciate if you share the video with them. I'm sure they find it enjoyable. And if you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate if you hit the like button and drop a comment, because interacting with the video in different types of ways like that really helps out the algorithm and goes a long way. So it'd be nice if you clicked on something. And if you are new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here. Got a lot of spicy builds in the way for season 23, so hope you can stay tuned for that. And I'll catch ya in the next video. See you later.